My son had $2 million. I had $247 and an eviction notice. He threw water in my face when I asked for help. 72 hours later, I was on a plane to Portugal with $600,000 of his money, and he had no idea where I'd gone. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories. Margaret Chin had raised her son alone for 32 years. 32 years of sacrifice, of working double shifts at the hospital, of skipping meals so he could have new shoes, of putting her dreams on hold so he could chase his. And now, at 63 years old, she sat in her son Daniel's luxury penthouse apartment, water dripping from her face, humiliation burning hotter than any fire. Are you serious right now, Mom? Daniel's voice was sharp, irritated, as if she were a persistent telemarketer rather than the woman who'd given him life. I just gave you $5,000 last month. What did you do with it? Margaret wiped the water from her eyes with trembling hands. The glass Daniel had thrown, not handed, thrown, now lay shattered on the marble floor beside her chair. She'd only asked for help with her mortgage payment. The bank was threatening foreclosure, and her retirement fund had been depleted years ago, helping Daniel through his business ventures that always seemed to need just one more investment. I paid my property taxes, she said quietly, her voice barely steady. And the medical bills from my surgery. You remember, the one I mentioned. Oh my God, Mom, I can't keep doing this. Daniel threw his hands up, pacing across his designer living room. His girlfriend, Vanessa, a woman 15 years younger than him who'd never worked a day in her life, watched from the doorway with barely concealed disdain. You're like a black hole for money. No matter how much I give you, you always need more. Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, she'd been broken before and survived. This was different. This was the sound of the last thread of hope snapping. She stood slowly, water still dripping onto Daniel's expensive rug. Her purse sat on the chair beside where she'd been sitting. She picked it up with dignity she didn't feel. You're right, she said softly. I shouldn't have asked. Mom, don't be dramatic, Daniel started, but she held up her hand. Do you remember, she said, her voice eerily calm, when you were 8 years old and broke your arm falling off your bike? I was working the night shift, but I left in the middle of it, risking my job, to sit with you in the emergency room for 7 hours because you were scared? Daniel's expression shifted uncomfortably. Mom. Do you remember when you were 23 and your can't-miss cryptocurrency investment collapsed? Who took out a second mortgage on her house to cover your debts so you wouldn't declare bankruptcy? That's not fair. Do you remember last year when I asked if I could move in with you after I lost my job at the hospital? You said this penthouse was too small. It has 4 bedrooms. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa had the decency to look away. Daniel's face was red, but whether from shame or anger, Margaret couldn't tell. She didn't care anymore. I'm going to leave now, Margaret said, walking toward the door. Thank you for the water. It was very refreshing. She heard Daniel call after her as she waited for the elevator, but she didn't turn around. When the elevator doors closed, she finally let the tears come. But beneath the tears, something else was growing. Something cold and hard and determined. Her son had forgotten who she was. He'd forgotten what she was capable of. It was time to remind him. Margaret's apartment was small, a studio in a building that should have been condemned years ago. The pipes rattled, the neighbors were loud, and the elevator broke down more often than it worked. It was a far cry from the comfortable suburban home she'd owned before the second mortgage. She sat at her rickety kitchen table that night, staring at her laptop screen. The humiliation of the afternoon still burned, but now it was fuel rather than pain. She'd helped Daniel build his wealth. Not just with money, though God knew she'd given him enough, but with connections, advice, and access to her own financial accounts when his credit was shot. And Daniel, brilliant but lazy Daniel, had never been particularly careful about security. Margaret pulled up her email and searched for a message from 3 years ago. There it was, Daniel asking her to transfer money from her account to his business account, complete with his login credentials so she could see where the money was going and feel confident in the investment. She'd never used those credentials. She'd trusted him. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong. Parents weren't supposed to access their adult children's accounts without permission. Then again, children weren't supposed to throw water in their mother's face. She typed in the web address for Daniel's bank. Entered the username. The password was probably changed by now. The account loaded. Margaret's breath caught. Daniel hadn't changed his password. Not in 3 years. And the balance. $847,382.67. She stared at the number in disbelief. Her son, who claimed he couldn't help with her $3,000 mortgage payment, had nearly $1 million sitting in his checking account. Not an investment account. Not a retirement fund. His regular checking account. Margaret thought about her own account balance, $247.18. Enough for groceries if she was careful. Not enough for next month's rent, let alone the mortgage payment the bank was demanding. She closed the laptop and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Questions swirled through her mind. What would you do? Would you? A. Close the laptop and never look again, it's wrong to access his account. B. Just look at the transactions to understand where his money comes from. C. Transfer enough to cover your immediate bills, you did help him earn it. D. Something more drastic. Margaret knew what the right answer was. But she also knew that the right answer had left her broke, homeless adjacent, and with water dripping down her face. By morning, she'd made her decision. Margaret spent the next week doing research. She wasn't impulsive. 30 years as a surgical nurse had taught her to plan carefully, consider all angles, and execute with precision. She created a new email address under a fake name. She researched international banking laws. She watched YouTube videos about digital nomads and retiring abroad. She made lists, checked them twice, and then checked them again. The more she learned, the clearer her path became. Daniel's account wasn't just his salary from his tech job, a job she'd helped him get through her connection with Dr. Raymond, whose son worked at the company. The deposits showed investments, crypto gains, and regular transfers from his business account. Business account. The one she'd helped him set up. The one where she was still listed as a cosigner from when he needed her credit score to open it. Margaret logged into that account too. Balance, $1.2 million. She sat back, her heart pounding. Her son, her ungrateful, water-throwing son, was sitting on over $2 million while she faced eviction. But she wasn't angry anymore. Anger was hot and impulsive. What she felt now was cold and calculated. She opened a notebook and began to write. Plan, the exit. Phase 1, preparation. Open international bank account, country with strong banking privacy. Research countries with low cost of living and no extradition treaty. Secure new identity documents, passport, etc. Purchase plane tickets. Liquidate all U.S. assets. Phase 2, transfer. Move funds from Daniel's accounts to intermediary accounts. Transfer through multiple countries to obscure trail. Convert to different currencies. Establish accounts in final destination country. Phase 3, disappear. Leave note explaining why. Depart country. Establish new life abroad. Block all communication from Daniel. Amount to take, TBD. That last line gave her pause. How much was fair? How much would teach him a lesson without destroying him? Then she remembered his face when he threw that water. The contempt. The dismissal. The absolute certainty that she was nothing more than an inconvenient burden. She picked up her pen and wrote, everything. Then she crossed it out. She wasn't a monster. She wrote, enough. But what was enough? Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the moral implications of what she was planning. She'd raised Daniel to be honest, to work hard, to treat people with respect. And now she was considering theft. Except, was it really theft? She pulled out a calculator and her old records. Over the years, she'd documented everything she'd given Daniel. College tuition, he'd gotten some scholarships, but she'd covered the rest $47,000. Living expenses during college, approximately $24,000. The cryptocurrency debt bailout, $85,000, the amount she'd borrowed against her house. Various business investments that never paid back, $34,000. The car she'd bought him for graduation, $28,000. Smaller loans over the years, estimated $15,000. Total, $233,000. That wasn't even counting the intangibles. The networking connections she'd provided. The free place to live for 2 years after college. The emotional support through his various failed relationships and business ventures. And what had Daniel given her? The $5,000 he'd mentioned, thrown in her face like she should be grateful. Maybe another $10,000 over the years in birthday gifts and Christmas money. Margaret stared at the numbers. Even accounting for inflation and interest, Daniel owed her. Legally? Maybe not. Morally? Absolutely. She thought about her mother, who'd passed away 10 years ago. Her mother had always said, a parent's love shouldn't come with a price tag, but a child's gratitude shouldn't come with an expiration date. Daniel's gratitude had apparently expired the moment he'd made his first million. Margaret opened her laptop and began phase 1 of her plan. Opening an international bank account turned out to be easier than Margaret expected. She chose a bank in Portugal, a country she'd always wanted to visit, with a reasonable cost of living and a welcoming attitude toward retirees. She told them she was planning to retire there, not a lie, and wanted to establish banking before she moved, also not a lie. Within 2 weeks, she had her Portuguese account information. Next came the passport situation. Hers was current, thankfully. She'd renewed it 3 years ago for a trip to Canada that never happened because Daniel had needed money for a can't-miss opportunity. She sold what little she owned. The furniture went on Craigslist. Her mother's jewelry, the pieces Daniel had always said he'd want someday, went to a pawn shop. Her car, old and unreliable, fetched $1,200 from a kid who needed cheap transportation. Every dollar went into her meager savings account. She'd need cash for the transition. She gave her landlord notice. He barely reacted. She'd been a quiet tenant, and he already had a list of people waiting for the apartment. The hardest part was telling her few remaining friends. She kept it vague. I'm moving abroad. I need a fresh start. They were supportive, if confused. Most of them knew about her difficult relationship with Daniel. Her friend Patricia, who'd known her since nursing school, gripped her hand over coffee. Does Daniel know? Not yet, Margaret said. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Margaret, what are you planning? Just a fresh start, Margaret said, but Patricia knew her too well. Whatever you're thinking of doing, Patricia said carefully, make sure it's worth it. Revenge has a price. So does dignity, Margaret replied. 3 weeks after the water incident, Margaret was ready. Her apartment was empty except for a suitcase and a carry-on. Her bills were paid through the end of the month. Her plane ticket was booked for a flight to Lisbon via London, departing in 4 days. Now came the hardest part, the actual transfer of funds. Margaret had learned a lot about moving money in the digital age. The key was to move it in ways that wouldn't trigger immediate red flags while still being quick enough that Daniel wouldn't notice before she was safely out of the country. She started with the business account, the one where she was still a legal cosigner. That made it technically not theft, though she suspected Daniel's lawyer would disagree. She transferred $200,000 to a temporary account she'd opened at a different U.S. bank under her own name. It was within her rights as a co-signer to move money between accounts. She left a memo, repayment of loans as discussed. The next day, she transferred that money to her Portuguese account in 3 separate transactions to stay under reporting thresholds. Each transfer took a day to process. The waiting was agony. Daniel's personal checking account was trickier. She wasn't a co-signer there. But she had his login credentials, and the bank had a send money feature that allowed transfers to external accounts. She set up her Portuguese account as a payee, claiming it was for international business consulting, another feature she'd learned about. The bank system required a small verification deposit first. Her heart pounded as she waited for the verification. This was it. This was actual theft, no matter how she justified it. She could still stop. She could close the laptop, call Daniel, and apologize. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel: "Vanessa and I are in Hawaii. Paradise. Desert island." Below was a photo of them on a beach, champagne glasses raised, designer sunglasses glinting in the sun. Margaret looked around her empty studio apartment. She looked at her bank balance, $1,447.18 after selling everything she owned. She verified the Portuguese account and transferred $400,000 from Daniel's checking account. The money would take 3 business days to arrive. By then, she'd be in Portugal. Margaret knew she had to leave something. Disappearing without explanation would be cruel, and despite everything, she didn't want to be cruel. She wanted to be understood. She sat at her empty kitchen table with a pen and paper. Email felt too impersonal. A letter, an actual, physical letter, felt right. She wrote, "Dear Daniel, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm not going to tell you where, not because I fear you'll come after me, but because I know you won't. You're probably looking at your bank accounts right now, trying to figure out what happened. Let me save you time. I took the money. Approximately $600,000, give or take whatever interest accrues during the transfers. Before you call the police, the lawyers, or whoever else you think can fix this, let me explain something. I'm not a thief. I'm a mother collecting a debt. Do you remember how much I've given you over the years? I do. I have receipts, bank statements, and records, $233,000 in direct financial support, not counting the countless intangible investments in your success. You once told me that business was business, and family was family. You said that when I asked if you'd pay me back for the cryptocurrency bailout. Mom, you can't mix family and money, you said. What I do with my money is my business. So I decided to treat this as business. And in business, debts must be paid. $600,000 might seem like a lot. But consider it back payment plus interest for your college education, the debt I cleared for you, the house I lost helping you, the retirement I'll never have in this country, and the dignity you took from me when you threw water in my face. That last one? That's expensive. Turns out dignity has a price after all. I'm not writing this for your forgiveness. I don't need it. I'm writing this so you understand that actions have consequences. You taught me that people only value what they pay for. So now you've paid. Maybe now you'll value what I gave you. I hope you have a good life, Daniel. I hope Vanessa makes you happy. I hope your business succeeds. I genuinely do. But I'm going to have a good life too. And for the first time in 32 years, I'm going to put myself first. Don't look for me. Don't try to send lawyers or police. By the time anyone unravels the paper trail, I'll be long established in my new home. And honestly, I don't think you'll try that hard. You never did put much effort into our relationship. Take care of yourself. You're very good at that. Your mother. Margaret. P.S. There's still over $1.4 million left in your accounts. You'll be fine. You always are. She read it 3 times, making small edits. Then she sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to Daniel's apartment, and stamped it. She'd mail it tomorrow, from the airport, right before her flight. Margaret's last morning in America was surreal. She woke up on an air mattress in her empty apartment. She'd sold her bed 2 weeks ago, and made coffee with the last of her grounds in a pot she'd bought at a thrift store and would leave behind. Her phone had 11 missed calls from Daniel. He was back from Hawaii. The transfers had started clearing. She didn't listen to the voicemails. She didn't need to. She could imagine them, first confusion, then anger, then threats, then possibly, though she doubted it, some semblance of understanding. There was also a text from Patricia, "Call me before you do anything irreversible." But Margaret was past irreversible. She'd crossed that bridge when she clicked transfer. She took one last look around the studio apartment. 32 months she'd lived here, the cheapest place she could find after losing her house. The walls were thin, the heater was temperamental, and the bathroom always smelled faintly of mold. But it had been hers. She wouldn't miss it. At the airport, she checked her bag and kept her carry-on close. Inside was her laptop, her important documents, and $10,000 in cash, withdrawn from her account in small increments over the past week to avoid scrutiny. She found a mailbox in the terminal and dropped in Daniel's letter. No return address. No way to trace it back before she was gone. Her flight boarded at 2 p.m. She sat in economy. She could have afforded business class now, but habits die hard, and she didn't want to be memorable. As the plane taxied down the runway, Margaret powered off her phone for the last time. She'd get a new one in Portugal with a new number. This phone, with all its contacts and history, would end up in a dumpster in Lisbon. She watched America disappear beneath the clouds and felt nothing. No regret. No triumph. Just a strange, hollow peace. She was free. Lisbon was beautiful. Margaret had seen pictures, of course, but experiencing it in person was different. The sun was warm but not oppressive. The buildings were painted in cheerful yellows and oranges. The people spoke in melodic Portuguese that sounded like music. She took a taxi from the airport to a small hotel in the Alfama district, the old Moorish quarter with its narrow streets and faded grandeur. She'd booked 2 weeks here while she looked for permanent housing. The hotel clerk, a young woman named Sophia, spoke perfect English and was incredibly helpful. First time in Lisbon? First time starting over, Margaret said before she could stop herself. Sophia smiled knowingly. You'll like it here. Lisbon is good for new beginnings. Margaret's room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the street. She could hear fado music drifting up from a restaurant below, that distinctly Portuguese sound of beautiful sadness. She checked her Portuguese bank account on the hotel Wi-Fi. The transfers had all cleared. Balance, $607,247.82. She sat on the bed, staring at the number. It was real. She'd really done it. Her hands started shaking. Not from fear, from the sudden, overwhelming realization that she was completely alone in a foreign country with money she'd essentially stolen from her son. What had she done? She wanted to call Patricia. She wanted to call someone, anyone, who could tell her this was going to be okay. But that was the old Margaret. The Margaret who needed approval, who needed reassurance, who needed to be told what to do. The new Margaret had to figure things out on her own. She powered up the burner phone she'd bought at the Lisbon airport and opened the browser. First priority, find a lawyer who could help her navigate Portuguese residency requirements. Second priority, find a therapist. Because despite her determination, she knew this was going to mess with her head. Third priority, learn Portuguese. She couldn't hide behind English forever. She made a list, just like she'd always done. Lists made chaos manageable. Lists gave her control. By the time she fell asleep that night, exhausted from travel and adrenaline crash, she found 3 lawyers to consult, downloaded a Portuguese learning app, and located an English-speaking therapist who specialized in expats experiencing major life transitions. Tomorrow, she'd start building her new life. Day 3 in Lisbon, Margaret broke down crying in a pastry shop. She'd been doing well. She'd met with a lawyer who confirmed she could apply for a residence visa as a retiree with sufficient funds. She'd viewed 2 apartments, both lovely, both affordable, both unimaginable luxuries compared to her studio back home. She'd been eating bacalhau and drinking vinho verde and wandering the streets like a tourist, and for brief moments, she'd forgotten what she'd done. Then she'd walked past a mother and son in the pastry shop. The boy was maybe 30, and he was helping his elderly mother choose a cake, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing. And Margaret had completely fallen apart. The shop owner, an older man with kind eyes, brought her water and tissues and didn't ask questions. He just patted her shoulder and said something in Portuguese that sounded comforting. When she finally calmed down, she went back to her hotel and did what she'd been avoiding. She turned on her old phone. 147 missed calls from Daniel. 83 text messages. 47 voicemails. She started with the texts, reading them in chronological order. Mom, what's going on with my account? Mom, call me. There's a problem with my bank. MOM. Did you transfer money from my accounts? What the FUCK, Mom? Call me now. I'm calling the police. My lawyer says you'll go to jail for this. How could you do this to me? Vanessa left me. She said I'm obviously not stable if my own mother is stealing from me. Then, 3 days later. Mom, please. Just call me. We can fix this. I'm sorry about the water thing. I was stressed. You know I didn't mean it. Please just tell me you're okay. I'm worried. And finally, yesterday. Patricia told me you left the country. She wouldn't say where. Mom, what are you doing? This isn't you. Margaret's hands trembled as she read. She clicked on the most recent voicemail and held the phone to her ear. Daniel's voice was different from usual, smaller, younger, scared. Mom, it's me again. I went to your apartment. You're really gone. Everything's gone. I don't understand what's happening. Did I really hurt you that badly? Was it really that bad? There was a long pause, then I talked to Patricia. She told me some things. About how much you gave me over the years. About the house. I didn't know you lost the house because of me. You never said. You always just said you wanted to downsize. Another pause. I'm not going to call the police. My lawyer said I probably could, but you're my mom. And maybe I had this coming. I don't know. I'm confused and angry and I miss you. Is that stupid? To miss someone who just stole $500,000 from you? The voicemail ended. Margaret sat in her hotel room, the phone still pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. This was the moment she'd wanted, wasn't it? The moment Daniel realized what he'd done, what he'd lost. So why did it feel so awful? Dr. Helena Rodriguez had an office in Chiado, Lisbon's elegant shopping district. She was in her 50s, Portuguese-American, and had a calm, non-judgmental presence that immediately put Margaret at ease. So, Dr. Rodriguez said after Margaret had explained everything, you took your son's money and fled the country. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible, Margaret said. How would you put it? Margaret thought carefully. I reclaimed what was mine and started over. Interesting distinction, Dr. Rodriguez made a note. Tell me, do you regret taking the money? No, Margaret said immediately. Then, less certainly, maybe. Sometimes. When I'm not thinking about it, no. But when I remember his voice on those voicemails. You feel guilty. Shouldn't I? What you should feel is up to you, Dr. Rodriguez said. But let me ask you something, if you could go back to that moment, Daniel throwing water in your face, and choose differently, what would you do? Margaret closed her eyes, picturing the scene. The contempt on Daniel's face. The water dripping down her cheeks. The humiliation. I'd still leave, she said quietly. Maybe I wouldn't take the money. But I'd still leave. So the money isn't really the issue. The money is freedom, Margaret said. Without it, I'd be stuck back there. Broke. Dependent. Eventually, I'd have crawled back to Daniel, and he'd have let me, and he'd have held it over me forever. The money means I don't have to go back. The money means you don't have to forgive him, Dr. Rodriguez said gently. Margaret's throat tightened. Is that wrong? Is what wrong? Not forgiving someone who hurt you? Not going back to a relationship that was making you miserable? Not sacrificing yourself on the altar of motherhood for the rest of your life? Dr. Rodriguez shook her head. Those aren't moral questions, Margaret. Those are survival questions. So you think I did the right thing? I think you did a human thing, Dr. Rodriguez said. Human things are messy and complicated and rarely fit neatly into categories of right and wrong. You took money from your son. That's a fact. He treated you terribly for years. Also a fact. You're hurt and angry and guilty all at once. All facts. None of them cancel each other out. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. How do I live with this? One day at a time, Dr. Rodriguez said. You build a life here. You figure out who you are when you're not defined by being someone's mother. You sit with the uncomfortable feelings until they get a little less uncomfortable. And maybe, eventually, you decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want with Daniel. What if he hates me forever? What if you hate him forever? Dr. Rodriguez countered. Which would be worse? Margaret didn't have an answer to that. 3 months into her Portuguese adventure, Margaret had settled into a routine. She'd found an apartment in Graca, a quiet neighborhood with stunning views of the Tagus River. It was a one-bedroom with high ceilings, original tile work, and a balcony where she had coffee every morning. The rent was €850 a month, about $920. Utilities, groceries, and incidentals brought her monthly expenses to around €1,400, $1,520. Her money would last years at this rate, and Portugal had a tax-advantageous program for foreign retirees that would stretch it even further. She'd enrolled in Portuguese classes and could now navigate basic conversations. She'd made friends with her neighbors, Maria and João, a retired couple who invited her for dinner regularly, and Ana, a young artist who lived upstairs and practiced English with her. She volunteered twice a week at a local charity that provided meals to elderly and homeless residents. It felt good to be useful again, to help people without expecting anything in return. She'd stopped checking Daniel's messages. Dr. Rodriguez had suggested a communication boundary she'd check once a month, on a predetermined day, rather than compulsively looking every day. Her life was peaceful. Simple. And if she was honest, a little lonely. But it was hers. One evening, while sitting on her balcony watching the sunset paint the river gold, her phone rang. Her Portuguese phone, the one only Sofia from the hotel, her lawyer, and her neighbors had the number for. But the caller ID showed an American number. Her heart stopped. Only one person could have tracked down this number. She answered. Daniel? No, it's Patricia. Her friend's voice was warm but cautious. Before you hang up, I'm not calling on his behalf. I'm calling on mine. I miss my friend. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. How did you get this number? Your lawyer's assistant. I may have implied it was a medical emergency. I'm sorry for the deception, but I was worried about you. I'm fine, Margaret said. Better than fine, actually. I'm happy, Patricia. Good, Patricia said. You deserve to be happy. But sweetie, you've got to deal with the Daniel situation eventually. I am dealing with it. By not dealing with it. That's avoidance, not resolution. Margaret watched a boat pass on the river below. What does he want? To talk to you. To understand. Maybe to apologize, though he hasn't said that explicitly. He can apologize in a letter. He's tried. You haven't responded. Margaret had seen the letters, 3 of them, forwarded by her lawyer. She hadn't opened them. I'm not ready, she said. Okay, Patricia said gently. But eventually, you're going to have to decide what you want. Do you want to cut him out of your life forever? Do you want some kind of reconciliation? Do you want to just keep existing in this limbo? Because limbo isn't sustainable, Margaret. Trust me. How is he? Margaret asked quietly. Honestly? He's a mess. Lost the girlfriend, which is probably for the best. Threw himself into work, but his heart's not in it. He's seeing a therapist. Good. He's grown up a lot in 3 months. Perspective, you know? He finally understands what he had and what he lost. And what did he lose? Margaret asked, her voice hard. The money? Or me? You'll have to ask him that yourself. After they hung up, Margaret sat on her balcony until the sun disappeared completely and the lights of Lisbon flickered on like stars. She wasn't ready to talk to Daniel. But maybe, someday, she would be. For now, she had a life to build. 6 months after arriving in Portugal, Margaret finally opened Daniel's letters. She did it on a Sunday morning, after breakfast, with strong coffee and tissues within reach. Dr. Rodriguez had suggested she read them when she felt emotionally stable, in a safe space, with no time pressure. The first letter was written shortly after she'd left. Mom. I don't even know how to start this. You stole from me. That's a fact. I could have you arrested. My lawyer keeps telling me I should. But every time I think about actually doing that, about my mother in handcuffs, in court, in prison, I feel sick. Patricia came to see me. She told me things. About the house. About how much you've given me over the years. About how I've treated you. I don't know if I believe all of it. She's your friend, so of course she's on your side. But some of it I can't deny. The water thing was wrong. I know that. I was stressed about work, and Vanessa was being difficult, and you walked in asking for money again, and I just snapped. But that's not an excuse. I know it's not. I'm angry, Mom. Really angry. But I'm also confused. If I was so terrible, why didn't you just tell me? Why did you have to steal from me? Call me. Please. We need to talk about this like adults. Daniel. Margaret set the first letter aside and opened the second, dated 2 months later. Mom. You're not calling. You're not writing back. I don't even know if you're getting these letters or if you've tossed them in the trash. Vanessa left me. She said if I can't manage my own family, I can't manage a relationship. She took the dog. Did you know we got a dog? You would have liked him. Golden retriever named Murphy. My therapist, yes, I'm seeing a therapist now, says I need to understand my role in our relationship breakdown. She says I've been treating you like an ATM in reverse, someone who's supposed to give me things without me having to give anything back. I told her that's not true. I gave you money. I invited you to holidays. She asked how much money, and how often, and whether I ever asked what you actually needed versus what I felt like giving. I couldn't answer that. I've been going through my bank records, looking at how much you gave me over the years. You were right, it was more than $200,000. Way more when I factor in interest and opportunity cost. I could have paid off your mortgage dozens of times over. I could have bought you a house outright. Instead, I bought Vanessa a $40,000 engagement ring she gave back when she left. I'm an idiot, Mom. But I think you already knew that. Daniel. The third letter was dated just last week. Mom. It's been 6 months. Patricia won't tell me where you are, but she says you're safe and happy. I'm glad. I really am. I'm not writing to ask you to come back. I'm not even writing to ask for the money back, though my accountant keeps suggesting I should. I'm writing because I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. You weren't teaching me a lesson about money. You were teaching me about value. For 32 years, you valued me more than you valued yourself. You gave me everything, your time, your money, your connections, your home, your dignity. And I took it all like it was my right. Like you were some kind of infinite resource that would never run out. But you did run out. And instead of recognizing that, instead of stepping up, I threw water in your face. I've thought about that moment every day for 6 months. I see the look on your face, not anger, but something worse. Resignation. Like you'd finally accepted that I was never going to be the son you deserved. You were right. But I'm trying to be better. I'm working on it. I've started volunteering at a homeless shelter, partly because my therapist suggested it, but mostly because I wanted to understand what desperation feels like. What it's like to need help and have people look through you like you're invisible. That's how I made you feel, wasn't it? Invisible. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back the years you spent putting me first. I can't return the house you lost or the retirement you should have had. But I want you to know that the money you took? It's the best investment you ever made in me. Because losing you, finally taught me what all those years of having you couldn't. I love you, Mom. I don't think I ever actually said that. Not as an adult. Not in a way that meant anything. I love you, and I'm sorry, and I hope someday you'll let me prove that I can be better. Your son, Daniel. P.S. I set up a trust fund in your name. You're the sole beneficiary, and I can't touch it. It's $300,000, not as much as you took, but it's what I can spare right now. Patricia has the details. It's yours whether you ever talk to me again or not. Consider it a very late thank you for everything you gave me. Margaret read the last letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. These weren't the words of the arrogant man who'd thrown water at her. These were the words of someone who'd been broken down and built back up differently. But were they enough? Margaret spent 2 weeks thinking about the letters. She discussed them in therapy. She talked to Patricia on the phone. She even asked her Portuguese neighbors for advice. Maria had a son she hadn't spoken to in 5 years over a family dispute. The question isn't whether he deserves forgiveness, Maria said in her heavily accented English. The question is whether you deserve peace. Sometimes, these are not the same thing. Margaret thought about that a lot. Did she deserve peace? And if so, what did that peace look like? One evening, she sat down at her small kitchen table with her laptop and began to type. Dear Daniel, I received your letters. All 3 of them. It took me a long time to be ready to read them, and even longer to know what to say in response. First, I want you to know that I'm safe. I'm living in Portugal, you might as well know now, since I'm not running anymore. I'm in Lisbon, and I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. Possibly for the first time in decades. Second, I want to address the money. You're right that what I did was theft, legally speaking. But I need you to understand something. I didn't take that money out of pure anger or revenge. I took it because it represented my freedom. Without it, I would have been trapped, dependent on your charity, always one crisis away from homelessness, always at your mercy. That's not a position any parent should be in with their child. And that's not a position I was willing to stay in. As for your letters, I believe you're trying to change. I believe you've had genuine realizations. But, Daniel, I need you to understand that realizations aren't the same as transformation. You've had 6 months of growth. I had 32 years of diminishment. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it so you understand why I can't just come back, accept your apology, and pretend the last 3 decades didn't happen. About the trust fund, thank you. Genuinely. But I'm not going to access it right now. I want you to hold on to it for 5 years. If, in 5 years, you're still the person you're trying to become, if you've sustained this growth, proven that it's not just guilt or temporary enlightenment, then I'll consider it your way of making amends. If in 5 years you've gone back to who you were, I'll tell Patricia to donate it to a charity for struggling single mothers. Either way, it won't be wasted. Now, here's what I'm willing to offer. In 6 months, we can talk. Not in person, I'm not ready for that. But a video call. 1 hour. We can see how it goes. In the meantime, I need you to respect my boundaries. That means no surprise visits to Portugal. No hiring investigators to track my movements. No guilt trips through Patricia. No emergencies designed to force contact. If you can respect these boundaries, we might be able to build something new. Not the old mother-son relationship, that's dead, and I'm not interested in resurrecting it. But maybe something different. Something healthier. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you. I don't know if we'll ever be close again. But I'm willing to see if we can at least find peace with each other. That's all I can offer right now. Take care of yourself, Daniel. And this time, I mean it in a good way. Mom. She read the email 5 times, making small edits. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she hit send. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. But she also felt lighter. She'd set terms. She'd established boundaries. She'd offered a path forward without sacrificing her own needs. It was more than Daniel deserved, maybe. But it was also more than she'd ever given herself. Daniel's response came the next day. Mom. Thank you for responding. Thank you for not blocking me forever. Thank you for giving me a chance. I accept your terms. All of them. 6 months from now, we'll talk. Until then, I won't contact you unless you initiate it. I'm going to prove to you that I've changed. Not with words, but with actions. You'll see. I love you. Daniel. And then, nothing. 6 months of silence followed. Margaret checked her email occasionally, half expecting Daniel to break his promise, to reach out just to check in or manufacture some emergency. But he didn't. Patricia reported that he was doing well. Working hard but not obsessively. Volunteering regularly. Dating someone new, a teacher named Rachel who Patricia described as normal in the best possible way. He asks about you, Patricia said during one of their monthly calls. But he doesn't push me for information. He just wants to know you're okay. I am okay, Margaret said. And she meant it. Her life in Lisbon had blossomed. She'd become conversational in Portuguese. She joined a book club with other expat retirees. She'd started taking painting classes, something she'd always wanted to try but never had time for. She'd even, tentatively, started dating. Miguel was a widower, a retired engineer who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. They'd met at her volunteer work. He delivered donated furniture. It wasn't serious. Neither of them wanted serious. But it was nice to have someone to get coffee with, to walk along the river with, to share comfortable silence with. She told Dr. Rodriguez about him during one session. "How does it feel?" the therapist asked. "To be living for yourself instead of for Daniel?" "Selfish," Margaret admitted. "But also, necessary. Like I'm finally filling a tank that's been running on empty for decades. And when that tank is full, what then?" Margaret thought about the upcoming video call with Daniel, now just 2 weeks away. Then maybe I'll have something to give again. But only if I choose to. Not because I'm obligated. "That's growth," Dr. Rodriguez said with a smile. "Real, sustainable growth." The night of the video call, Margaret set up her laptop on her kitchen table with the window behind her, showing the Lisbon skyline at sunset. She wanted Daniel to see what she'd built. She wanted him to see that she was thriving. She also wanted him to see that she didn't need him anymore. At exactly 7 p.m. Lisbon time, 2 p.m. in California, her computer chimed with an incoming call. She took a deep breath and answered. Daniel's face filled the screen, and Margaret's breath caught. He looked different. Older, yes, 6 months had passed, but also, softer somehow. Less arrogant. The sharp edges had been worn down. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Hello, Daniel." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Margaret noticed the office behind him was different, simpler, less flashy. No expensive art on the walls. "You look good," Daniel said. "Happy." "I am," Margaret said. "How are you?" "I'm better. Still working on myself, but better." He paused. "Thank you for agreeing to this call. I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would. I keep my promises." The barb landed. Daniel winced slightly but didn't deflect. "You do. You always did." "I'm learning to." They talked for 15 minutes about surface things, his job, her Portuguese classes, the weather. It was awkward, stilted, like strangers making small talk. Then Daniel said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "I might not answer." "Fair." He took a breath. "Do you hate me?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "No. I don't hate you. I'm angry with you. I'm disappointed in you. But I don't hate you. Do you think you could ever forgive me?" "I don't know," Margaret said honestly. "Maybe. But Daniel, you need to understand something. Forgiveness isn't the goal here. The goal is for us both to be healthy, with or without each other. If forgiveness happens along the way, fine. But I'm not working toward it." "What are you working toward?" "Peace," Margaret said. "I'm working toward peace with my choices, with my life, with the fact that I spent 32 years being your mother and might spend the next 30 years being something else entirely." Daniel's eyes were red. "I miss you." "You miss the version of me that gave you everything," Margaret said, not unkindly. "I don't think you actually know the version of me that exists now." "Then let me get to know her." Daniel leaned forward. "I'm not asking to be forgiven. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking for a chance to know who you are now." Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of possibility. "1 call a month," she said. "Like this. 1 hour. We can talk about our lives, our days, nothing heavy. And if either of us needs to stop, we stop. No guilt, no pressure. I can do that, Daniel said immediately. And Daniel? If you revert, if I see you slipping back into old patterns, I'm gone. For good this time. Understood? Understood. They talked for another 30 minutes. It got easier as it went on. Daniel told her about Rachel, about his volunteering, about the changes he was making at work to focus on projects with social impact rather than just profit. Margaret told him about Miguel, about her painting class, about the community she'd built. When the hour was up, they said goodbye with an agreement to talk again in a month. After the call ended, Margaret sat at her table, watching the last light fade from the sky. She felt okay. Not wonderful, not terrible. Just okay. And okay was enough. The monthly calls continued. Some months they were easy, comfortable even. Other months they were hard, tense, full of old resentments bubbling to the surface. But they kept showing up. Daniel kept showing up. That mattered more than Margaret had expected it to. 1 year after she'd left America, Daniel asked if he could visit Lisbon. Not to see you, necessarily, he said quickly. I mean, I'd like to see you, but I'm not trying to pressure you. I want to see where you've been. Understand your life now. Margaret discussed it with Dr. Rodriguez, with Patricia, with Miguel, who'd become her closest confidant. What do you want? Miguel asked her over dinner one evening. I don't know, Margaret admitted. Part of me wants to see him. Part of me is terrified that seeing him in person will undo all the progress I've made. Then make it on your terms, Miguel suggested. Public place. Time limit. Escape plan if you need it. Margaret thought about it for a week before responding to Daniel, you can come. But here are my conditions. She outlined everything. He'd stay in a hotel, not with her. They'd meet in public places only. She'd introduce him to Miguel. They'd have no more than 2 visits during his week-long stay. And she reserved the right to cancel any meeting if she felt uncomfortable. Daniel agreed to everything. 3 weeks later, Margaret stood in a cafe in Chiado, watching the door. Her heart pounded. Her palms sweated. Miguel sat at a nearby table, not hovering, but present if she needed him. Then Daniel walked in. He was dressed simply, jeans, a casual shirt, no designer labels. He carried a backpack instead of expensive luggage. He looked around the cafe uncertainly until he spotted her. Their eyes met. Margaret saw her son, really saw him, for the first time in over a year. He looked humbler, quieter, more real. He walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away as if afraid to get too close. Hi, Mom. Hello, Daniel. They sat down. Ordered coffee. Made small talk about his flight, the beauty of Lisbon, the weather. Then Daniel said, I brought you something. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents. These are the deeds to 3 properties, he said quietly. The house in Denver that you lost, I bought it back. It's yours again, free and clear. If you ever want to come back, it's there. If you don't, you can sell it or rent it out. Whatever you want. Margaret stared at the papers, unable to speak. And these, Daniel continued, pulling out more documents, are statements showing I've donated $500,000 to charities supporting single mothers, elder care, and medical debt relief. In your name. The Margaret Chin Fund. Daniel. I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness, he said quickly. I'm trying to show you that I understand. I understand what you sacrificed. I understand what I took. And I'm trying to pay it forward since I can't pay it back. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. Daniel's voice cracked. For a year, you've been generous enough to talk to me once a month. You didn't have to do that. You could have kept the money and disappeared forever, and you would have been completely justified. But you gave me a chance. So this is me trying to earn it. They talked for 2 hours. It was the most honest conversation they'd ever had. Daniel admitted things he'd never admitted before, his jealousy of the time she spent helping others, his resentment that she never seemed to prioritize herself, and therefore him, enough, his guilt about how he'd repaid her sacrifices. Margaret admitted her own failures, enabling his selfishness, never setting boundaries, using her martyrdom as a weapon to guilt him. We were both wrong, Margaret said finally. In different ways, we were both wrong. Can we be better? Daniel asked. Not who we were, but something new? Margaret looked out the window at the Lisbon street, at the life she'd built, at Miguel sitting patiently nearby, at the possibilities spreading before her. Maybe, she said. But it won't be fast, and it won't be easy, and it won't ever be like it was before. I don't want it to be like before, Daniel said. Before was broken. I want to build something new. Even if it takes years. Years, Margaret repeated. Can you commit to that? To years of work with no guarantee of outcome? Daniel met her eyes. You committed to 32 years with no guarantee I'd ever appreciate it. I think I can manage a few years of actually trying. Margaret stood in the Denver house, her house, running her hand along the kitchen counter. Daniel had fully renovated it. New appliances, fresh paint, updated bathrooms. But he'd kept the things that mattered, the window seat where she used to read, the garden where she'd grown tomatoes, the view of the mountains she'd loved. She wasn't moving back permanently. Portugal was home now. But she'd decided to spend summers in Denver, keeping a foot in both worlds. Daniel visited Portugal 3 times that second year. Each visit was easier than the last. They'd developed a rhythm, a way of being together that felt healthy rather than toxic. He met Miguel, and they'd gotten along well. Rachel came on the 3rd visit, and Margaret liked her immediately. She was grounded, kind, and unimpressed by Daniel's money. She keeps me honest, Daniel had said, and Margaret believed him. The monthly calls continued, but now they talked about real things, not just surface updates, but feelings, struggles, growth. When Daniel had a setback at work, he called her for advice. When Margaret felt lonely in Lisbon, she called him to talk. It wasn't the relationship they'd had before. It was better. One evening, sitting in her Lisbon apartment with Miguel, Margaret received a text from Daniel. Rachel said yes. We're engaged. I know this is fast, but when you know, you know. Would you come to the wedding? No pressure, but it would mean everything. Margaret showed the text to Miguel. What do you think? She asked. I think, Miguel said carefully, that the question isn't whether he deserves to have you at his wedding. The question is whether you want to be there. Margaret thought about it. 2 years ago, the answer would have been no. Even 1 year ago, probably no. But now? She typed back, I'd be honored to come. Congratulations to you both. The wedding was small, just 60 people in a garden venue outside San Francisco. Margaret flew in 3 days early and stayed at Daniel's house for the first time since everything had happened. It was strange being in his space again, but also oddly comfortable. The house was different now, less showroom, more home. There were photos on the walls, including one of Margaret from her nursing school graduation that she didn't even know he had. Rachel welcomed her warmly. He talks about you all the time, she said. About how brave you were to start over. You're kind of his hero. I'm nobody's hero, Margaret said, uncomfortable with the praise. You're wrong about that, Rachel said gently. You're definitely his hero. And mine too, honestly. It takes courage to demand better for yourself. The wedding day was beautiful, sunny but not too hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of jasmine. Margaret wore a simple blue dress and sat in the third row, next to Patricia on one side and Miguel, who'd flown in as her date, on the other. When Daniel walked down the aisle, they'd opted for a mutual entrance rather than the traditional bride entrance. He looked nervous and happy and young. When he saw Margaret, his face lit up, and he mouthed thank you. She nodded, tears in her eyes. The ceremony was short and sweet. The vows were personal. Daniel promised to never take for granted the people who love me and to work every day to deserve the family I've been given. At the reception, during the mother-son dance that Margaret had assumed wouldn't happen, Daniel approached her table. "Would you dance with me?" he asked. "I know this isn't traditional, and I know I haven't earned it, but—" "I'd like that," Margaret interrupted. They walked to the dance floor as the DJ put on a song, not a traditional mother-son song, but Lean on Me by Bill Withers. As they swayed to the music, Daniel said quietly, "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For leaving. For taking the money. For forcing me to grow up." He pulled back to look at her. "I was a spoiled, entitled asshole who didn't appreciate anything. If you hadn't done what you did, I'd still be that person. Rachel never would have looked at me twice." "You did the work," Margaret said. "I just gave you a reason to start." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You gave me a gift. The most expensive, most painful, most important gift I've ever received. You gave me the chance to become someone better." Margaret's throat tightened. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me." "I know," Daniel said. "That's what made it work. You finally put yourself first. And watching you do that taught me more than 32 years of you putting me first ever did." They finished the dance in silence, both crying openly, both healing in ways they hadn't known they needed. 5 years after Margaret had left America, she sat in a lawyer's office in Lisbon with Daniel beside her. "So," the lawyer said in perfect English, "you want to officially access the trust fund Mr. Chen set up? All $300,000? Margaret looked at Daniel. He nodded encouragingly. "Actually," Margaret said, "I want to split it. Half for me, half back to Daniel." Daniel started to protest, but Margaret held up her hand. "You've proven yourself," she said. "You've sustained your growth for 5 years. You've become someone I'm proud to know, not just because you're my son, but because you're a good man. The money was always a test, and you passed. But you earned it." "I earned my freedom," Margaret said. "I've got that. The money is just money now. And I'd rather see you use half of it to do something good. Maybe expand the Margaret Chin Fund. Maybe start that nonprofit you and Rachel have been talking about. Maybe just keep it as a reminder that you're capable of being generous." Daniel's eyes were wet. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." They signed the papers. $150,000 went into Margaret's account. $150,000 went back to Daniel with instructions to use it for charitable purposes. Afterwards, they had lunch at Margaret's favorite cafe, the same one where they'd had their first meeting 2 years ago. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said as they waited for their food. "Always." "Do you forgive me? Really, truly forgive me?" Margaret thought about the question, the same question he'd asked in their first video call, the question she'd been unable to answer then. "Yes," she said finally. "I do. Not because you've earned it or because enough time has passed, but because holding on to that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. So I forgive you. For me, not for you." "I'll take it," Daniel said with a watery smile. "But Daniel," Margaret continued, "forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean going back to who we were. We've built something new, something better. Let's keep building that, not try to resurrect the old relationship." "Agreed," Daniel said. "Forward, not backward." They raised their wine glasses in a toast. "To new beginnings," Margaret said. To the courage to demand them, Daniel added. They clinked glasses and drank. Margaret Chin was 73 years old when she stood in the garden of Daniel and Rachel's home in San Francisco, watching her grandson, they'd named him Marcus, after Rachel's father, blow out the candles on his 3rd birthday cake. She split her time now between Lisbon, 8 months, and the U.S., for months, perfectly balancing the life she'd built with the family she'd reclaimed. Miguel had passed away 2 years ago, peacefully, in his sleep. She'd mourned him deeply but without regret. They'd had 5 beautiful years together, and he'd taught her that love didn't have to be complicated or painful. Daniel had become the man she'd always hoped he'd be, generous, thoughtful, present. He and Rachel ran a foundation supporting single parents and struggling families. The Margaret Chin Fund had helped thousands of people. But more importantly, Daniel was a good father. Margaret watched him scoop up little Marcus, saw the pure love on his face, and felt something inside her settle. He'd broken the cycle. He was giving his son what he'd failed to appreciate, receiving unconditional love without the burden of unrealistic expectations. Vovô! Marcus called, using the Portuguese word for grandmother that Margaret had taught him. Come blow candles. Margaret walked over, her joints a bit stiff but her heart light. She bent down to Marcus's level. Make a wish, she told him. What you wish? He asked in his adorable toddler grammar. Margaret looked around, at Daniel and Rachel, at Patricia and her family, at the friends she'd made in both countries, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. I don't need to wish, she told Marcus. I've got everything I need right here. Later that night, after the party, after Marcus was in bed, Margaret sat on the back porch with Daniel and Rachel. Mom, Daniel said, I want you to know something. What's that? That moment, when you left, when you took the money, I've thought about it a lot over the years. And I realize now that you didn't just save yourself that day. You saved me too. How so? You showed me that love doesn't mean endless tolerance. That family doesn't mean accepting abuse. That parents are people too, with limits and needs and the right to walk away. He paused. You taught me that the best thing you can do for someone you love is sometimes to stop enabling them and let them fall. That's a hard lesson to learn, Margaret said. It's a harder lesson to teach, Daniel countered. Especially when teaching it meant giving up everything familiar. You are braver than I'll ever be. You're braver than you think, Margaret said. You are brave enough to change. Most people never manage that. Rachel squeezed Margaret's hand. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For raising a man who is capable of growth. For being tough enough to demand he rise to his potential. For being the kind of grandmother Marcus will be lucky to have. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears this time. He'll be lucky to have both of you as parents. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over San Francisco. Margaret thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago, broke, humiliated, desperate. She thought about the moment she'd clicked transfer on that money, terrified and determined in equal measure. She'd made the right choice. Not a perfect choice, there was no such thing. But a choice that had saved her life and, in a strange way, saved Daniel's too. I should go, Margaret said, standing. Miguel taught me that old ladies need their sleep. Daniel stood too and hugged her, a real hug, long and tight and full of the kind of love that had been missing for so many years. I love you, Mom, he said. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when you gave up on us. I never gave up on you, Margaret said. I just stopped betraying myself for you. There's a difference. As she drove back to her hotel, she still preferred hotels to staying in Daniel's house. Some boundaries were worth maintaining, Margaret felt. At peace in a way she'd never expected to feel again. She'd thrown water on her old life and watched it drown. She'd emptied the account and filled herself back up. She'd left the country and found herself. And now, a decade later, she had both, the life she'd built and the family she'd reclaimed, balanced in perfect, healthy proportion. She'd learned the hardest lesson any parent can learn: sometimes loving your child means saving yourself first. And she'd learned something even harder: sometimes the most radical act of love is walking away.